Hi, I'm Ryan F. Gassian, and this is Canada and the World, a progressive channel devoted to Canadian and world politics. I'll be tackling some of the most controversial issues of the day with an emphasis on how they affect Canadians. Please support my channel by subscribing and hitting the like button below. Remember, if you press the little bell, you will be notified whenever I upload a new video. And you would be helping me considerably if you share it via the share button. In the US, mass shootings are happening with increased frequency. It is very likely that when I post this video, another mass shooting will happen. And when one does, those on the right will argue that more must be done about mental health. Now, I agree that more must be done, both in the United States and in Canada. But is it fair to blame mental illness for the gun violence in the US? I'm currently on disabilities because I live with mental illness. That's why I'm bringing this up. That means I get a check from the government every month. I know what you must be thinking, I've heard it before. Oh Ryan, I envy you. You don't have to go to work. Why, if you wanted to, you could spend all your time playing video games, sleeping, going to the gym, and hanging out with your friends. Let's get one thing straight. I spend 8 hours a day or more writing my novels, including my upcoming novel, Darkness in America, and creating YouTube content. This is work, and I do it because I hope to get off disability. Understand, all I've ever wanted is a family. But how can you raise a family if you're on disability? The answer is you can't. Anyone who thinks living with a mental illness is fun is deluding themselves. It can be a form of living hell, one that you can never escape. It's there, no matter where you go, because it is inside you like a malignant cancer, slowly eating away at your sanity. Depending on the illness, there are drugs you can take. But they are not a magic bullet, and there are always side effects. Also, you must schedule your life around your medication. You want to go on a vacation? Well, you better make sure you have enough for the trip, and heaven help you if you lose any. It's not like you can just go to the nearest pharmacist and pick up a new batch. That's not how prescriptions work. Now, you might be wondering, what do I have? Where do I begin? I was born with a hole in my brain, in the region called the hypothalamic. That should have killed me. It didn't. As a child, I was diagnosed with autism, dyslexia, ADHD, and several other disorders I won't bother mentioning here. As I got older, it became apparent that I suffered from depression and a severe form of anxiety. This is not your typical anxiety. My anxiety has landed me many times in the emergency room. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine walking down a flight of stairs and seeing yourself falling and breaking your neck again and again. Of course, you haven't. It's all in your head, but it feels real. You are convinced it could happen at any moment. So certain of this that you get on your knees and begin crawling down the stairs. Your heart is racing unusually fast as you make your descent. Could you be having a heart attack? You don't know. But suddenly you feel pain in your chest. Your breathing quickens. You're panicking at this point, convinced that this might be your last night on Earth. You run to your car and get in. Recklessly, without thought, you drive to the emergency room. The doctor checks you and can find nothing wrong. You had no heart attack, no seizure, or whatever else you convinced yourself of. Without my meds, this is what I'm like. 15 years ago, when I was on different medication, an anxiety attack drove me to run into oncoming traffic. The truck driver stopped just in the nick of time, otherwise I would have been roadkill. Most anxiety attacks are not of this extreme, but this is life for me without my medication. Living in a state of perpetual terror, always convinced that something bad will happen. In such a state, there is no reasoning with me. I will obsess over my fears, my anxiety growing until it begins to manifest physically. Once, I was convinced I would die if I ate anything solid, so my throat seized up, and it became difficult for me to speak. There are other aspects of my mental illness that I'm still not comfortable talking about. Living with mental illness is not easy, especially when you are alone. I have few friends, and those that I do have are far away. I'm not in a relationship, Never have, though I badly desire one. Remember, my dream is to have a family, and yes, I'm painfully aware that my mental illness might make that impossible. People say I should befriend those who are like me, but I find they're the hardest to deal with. People with mental illness might have much in common, but they don't like talking with one another, or at least that has been my experience. Frankly, I find it easier dealing with non-mentally ill people. The rub is that they can't relate to my problems, which is ironic given that mental illness is on the rise. According to one study, 1 in 5 Canadians will be diagnosed with mental illness in their lifetime. But more ominously, 63% of Canadian millennials are considered high risk of developing one in 2017. This is much higher than other age groups and has been going up in recent years. In 2016, it was only 56%, and the year before that, it was 53%. That's a 10% increase in just 3 years. This begs the question, why are millennials becoming more prone to mental illness? The study lists multiple factors. It's harder for millennials to find jobs these days that actually pay well. This is partly why a lot of old millennials are holding off on having kids or buying their first house. They're told the economy is great, and yet they don't see it. There is a sense of hopelessness, something I know all too well, and this has led to many to depression. Yet the study suggests another factor, one I found surprising. Millennials are more open about living with mental illness. If you listen to the politicians on TV, particularly in the United States, you'd think that all people with mental illnesses are axe-wielding sociopaths. My mental illness doesn't make me prone to violence. That's not to say that certain types of illnesses don't lead people to violent behavior. Some do. However, most people with mental illness suffer in silence, too afraid to speak out or seek treatment. It doesn't help that politicians are demonizing us, saying we're the cause for the rise of gun violence. This is nonsense, easily provable by statistics. If mental illness was the cause, then we would notice no difference between the murder rates between Canada and the United States. In the United States, the number of people suffering from mental illness is roughly equal to what we see in Canada, 1 out of 5, or 18.5%. However, if you look at this chart, the death rate by firearms in the US is much higher than in Canada or anywhere else. Same percentage of mental illness, but nowhere near as many deaths. It almost seems like another factor is at work. I wonder what it could be. Here's another statistic you might find interesting. In Canada, 73.7% of firearms-related deaths are suicides. Now, many of the people who died were probably mentally ill, but we weren't killing other people, only ourselves. I have personally attempted suicide twice. I know how desperate people can get, thinking that things are never going to get better. That will drive anyone to buy a gun and shoot themselves. I survived because the methods I used were ineffective. Had I had access to firearms back then, I'd probably be dead. Blaming gun violence on people with mental illness is no different than blaming the victims of gun violence. It would be easy to say that politicians are just scapegoating, using us to push a pro-gun narrative. But the sad truth is that our kind have been demonized throughout the ages. Hell, in ancient times, people literally assumed that we were under the possession of the devil. Things will only improve if we lift the stigma of mental illness. People need to realize that it can affect anyone. Chances are you know someone suffering from it. That person may not be getting help because he or she is afraid of how society will judge them. That's why it's important for people with mental illness to talk about it. That's why I created this video. So, what do you think? What more can we Canadians do to improve the lives of people with mental illness? Please let me know in the comments section below, and please hit the subscribe button, as well as give me a like. Oh, and please visit my website at www.darknessinamerica.com, where you can read short stories that take place before my upcoming novel, Darkness in America. My story is about a future United States where people live in fear of inquisitors, Telepathic assassins who police the populace for thought crimes.